Hello and welcome back to Sandra's Shelf, where I talk all things self-help, mental health, and lifestyle. So today we're filming a video outside. It's a bit windy, so I'm not too sure how that's going to work, but I do have a microphone with a dead cat, so it should be okay. The audio quality should be fine. If not, I'll try to tweak it as much as I can. But this is just a test run. I love filming outside actually, and right now it's summertime, so everything's in bloom in my garden, so I figured why not change the scenery a little bit and just feel more grounded, because today we're going to talk about how to detach yourself, and basically how to detach yourself from past negative situations, trauma, from people, from places, from outcomes, just in general how to detach. And we're going to go through, I think, 4 components about how I learned how to detach and what I learned about detachment. And again, this is kind of like a part 2 from the video from last week when I talked about what I learned about happiness. So again, we're going through a little bit of some concepts from A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. So the book is going to be linked down below for sure. And I think I'm going to use some passages, but not as many as last time. I might just go through 1 or 2 passages. So first I want to start off by talking about how as humans we are just emotionally driven people. Okay, we're just very much emotionally driven. Most of our decisions that we make, even when we think that they are logical decisions, they still stem a lot from emotions. Even investing, when you invest in stocks, you think you're using logic, but you're also using some kind of emotional deduction. And depending when you're investing or at what time you're investing, you could be hungry, you could be more willing to take a risk at that time. You know what I mean? Everything impacts from our emotional world. As much as you're gonna learn how to detach, as humans, unless you're built or you suffer some kind of brain trauma where you don't have those emotional receptors, you're still gonna feel emotions, okay? And you're still gonna feel even if you practice detachment. That's just the nature of who we are. Now, I do want to say before we get into what I've learned and some tips and tricks, even when we learn how to let go, that does not mean that we're ignoring facts. I've had conversations with my father a lot where I told him to just let things go, or how I've been letting things go from my past and my upbringing and etc. It's really easy to just say let things go and then miss the fact, right? So if, for example, right now you're watching this video and you're in a hostile or toxic environment, it's not something you're going to want to hear when someone says let things go or just ignore it, right? And that's okay, because it takes a lot of practice to ignore things and to let things go and to attract different things in your life. So letting things go is not exactly about ignoring the facts, but it's about accepting the facts and accepting what you can't control. It's also not about caring, but it's about refocusing where you care and where you put your attention to. So say your environment or your partner is very toxic, what you can be doing at that point is, instead of focusing all on your partner and on the toxic situation that you guys are living on, you refocus that attention and care towards yourself, towards your life, towards other aspects of your life, right? So this is how you detach, okay? It doesn't mean you're an emotionless human being, that's not how detachment works. It just means that you are mindful enough to separate yourself from the situation and refocus somewhere else. Essentially, when you learn how to detach, you also learn how to stop having resistance and stop having grievances. When you have grievances against people, against the world, against past events, what ends up happening is that resentment grows within you, and you just feel more and more attached to those situations, those people, those places, etc. So in that way, detachment is just a way to cope and accept what was and focus on what is right now and what can be in the future. But even then, as humans, we need to accept that not everything is in our control, and that no matter what happens, we have to feel like we're gonna be okay, even if things go south, even if things go in a different direction. And that's where detachment is very useful for us, to keep us grounded and to keep us zen even when we're in the middle of a fire. So a last little note that I want to make, I know that telling people to just forget about their trauma never works, right? You don't just say, okay, you just detach from your trauma and that's it. To a certain extent, that's exactly what happens once you process it and you stop reliving it. then you detach from it enough to recognize when it's coming back to you, when you're thinking about it, when you're obsessing about it, and telling yourself, okay, no, I don't want to attach myself to this anymore. This is, I'm in a different stage in life. I acknowledge what happened, but I'm done with it, right? So when you're first starting off with this and when you have a lot of trauma, I still highly recommend talking through with a therapist, going through the trauma, doing what you need to do, and then after you can start practicing detachment. So like I said, I am someone who has borderline personality disorder, so when I say that I would relive the same situations in me every single day to the point where it made me sick, it made me chronically ill, it worsened my depression, my self-harm tendencies, and just my will to live. If someone would have told me back then to just detach, I would have told them you don't understand anything, which is true. Unless you go through severe trauma, more or less, you don't understand what it's like to live in someone's shoes, right, that has experienced severe trauma or persistent trauma and reliving those traumas. So by no means am I saying you're gonna detach the next day and you're gonna forget about all the traumas in your life, because I don't forget about all my traumas, but I am detached to them now. I can see them with this different lens and experience them so differently than I used to, right? And just understand that I'm just keeping myself stuck when I just keep on focusing and obsessing about things that has already passed, basically. And on top of that, I have BPD, so I understand how detachment can be really hard when you first hear of it and you try to implement it in your life. Because as someone with BPD, what we know is a lot of emotional dysregulation. We cannot control our emotion, we cannot control our emotional responses to certain things, or we do control it, but we hide what we can't control. So me personally, what would happen is that I would pretend everything is fine, I would be super impassive, but the moment I'm home, it's reckless behavior, crying, outbursts, hiding in my room for days, doing all kinds of stuff because I can't emotionally handle things, right? So of course, if you're at that point in life, you need to come up with different skills and coping skills first, and then when you're ready, when you feel like you have more breath of fresh air, then you can start practicing detachment, right? So as always, this is always my experiences. These videos are just what I've learned and that I share. I'm not a therapist. I'm not licensed in any way to give any applicable advice. These advice are just advice that you wish to take if you want to, or you wish to ignore if you want to, or if you wish to engage with anything, you can always engage down below. But like I said, if you are going through things, please don't isolate. Please talk to professionals and just know that you're not alone. Now that we said that, let's get into what I learned about detachment. First thing I learned is that if you want to learn how to detach to things, you have to know what you're actually attached to. Now, these attachments can be very subtle, or they can be very ingrained, or they can be very, very obvious as well. When you obsess over a guy or a girl and your friends are like, oh my god, can you stop talking about them? That's when you know you are severely attached. And like I said, there's nothing wrong about caring about things, right? But when the attachment causes you pain and suffering, when it causes you to, forget about yourself and forget about, how to be more at peace in your life and with yourself, that's when it is a problem. So essentially, anything that has control over you, control over your emotions, control over your happiness, control over your life, are the things essentially that you are attached to. Now, these can be things that are mildly healthy and beneficial, and these can also be things that are not healthy and not beneficial, right? The point is not to detach from everything, but it's to understand when you need to detach and be able to detach when you need it. I would recommend writing a list of things that you are incredibly attached to and writing down if it brings you joy or if it doesn't bring you joy, because the thing is, even if it brings you joy, it can be detrimental to your health. Because say I'm attached to my label as a successful writer, and then say I am a successful writer for the next 5 years, okay? So happy, so attached to it, everything is going well. What happens the day when I am no longer a successful writer? Say if that happens in 5 years from now. Am I gonna be so depressed? Am I gonna go back to my suicidal tendencies? Like, what is going to happen? So anything that you are severely attached to can have that impact over you, whether for the good or for the bad. So if I were you, I would write down the things that I'm attached to, and then write down what would happen if things went south and if things went well, right? So if you're attached to a person, a place, an outcome, an income, whatever, then write a line of like the best case scenario and the worst case scenario according to your attachment. And now you might say, okay, but Sandra, how do I detach then? If we cannot attach ourselves to anything, how do I detach? I'm not saying you can detach, but I can say you can be aware of your attachments, and like that, make sure that they don't impact you and your life too much, right? So I'm gonna go back into this book and read something here. It says here, how do you let go of attachment to things? Don't even try, it's impossible. Attachment to things drops away by itself when you no longer seek to find yourself in them. In the meantime, just be aware of your attachment to things. Sometimes you may not know that you're attached to something, which is to say identified, until you lose it or there is a threat of loss. If you then become upset, anxious, and so on, it means you are attached. If you're aware that you are identified with a thing, the identification is no longer total. I am the awareness that is aware that there is attachment. That's the beginning of the transformation of consciousness. So he's not saying not to be attached to things. What he's saying is that you have to recognize what you're attached to in order to be able to detach when time comes. And this is the second thing that I learned, is that a lot of the attachment that we have is closely related and tied into our egoic mind. So like I said, you cannot separate, right? You cannot kill your ego. We all have ego. But the ego is the one saying me, mine, my, I. You know, I am a writer, I am successful, I am this, I have this, I do this, right? So it's all about the focus into what you have, what you are, etc. Just think about something so basic, like think about what happens to your mind and to you and to your attachment when a person you don't even like or you don't even fancy stops fancying you and stops liking you, okay? We've all been there at one time where someone has a crush on us and we just like the flattery so much that we get attached to it. We're not even attached to the person, we're attached to the flattery because it flatters our ego. And then the moment that person realizes that they're never gonna have a chance and that we don't actually like them, we just like the flattery they give us, they, you know, hopefully move on and they go to where they're wanted, or they go towards someone else, right? But then what happens is some of us, we get so upset or we get so attached to it and we want that attachment back, to the point where the worst case scenario, we might even fake that we like that person back just to get the attention, which is wrong, but it has happened. Like I've done it in the past, like it's happened to me when I was growing up, whatever, you know. And that's, again, it goes back to ego and attachment. And you see, that's another way where you didn't detach yourself, and so now you're not only harming yourself, but you're harming someone else too. And that's why it's really important to recognize, where is the ego coming into play here? Where is the me, mine, my, I, you know, coming into play? Another thing that I noticed when it comes to the ego is that it involves the big 3 C's. And the big 3 C's, in my opinion, are complaining, comparing, and controlling. You are attached to things when you compare, you control, and you complain. That's just inevitable. The moment you compare yourself to something or a situation or something that you want or someone else, you are attached to outcomes. You're attached to that person. You're attached to that idea. The moment you start controlling things, you're attached to the outcome of what you're controlling. You're attached to the person you're controlling, the job you're controlling, the schedule you're controlling. You're very severely attached. The moment you start complaining, you're also attached. So if you're complaining about someone, something, a past event, a past trauma, if you keep on complaining about it, you are still severely attached. And attachment can cause misery, as we've seen previously. So in that way, the ego is all about having and not having. And then also, we equate happiness and peacefulness and zenful life and living with having and not having, which if you read this book, you will understand that that's not the way we should measure ourselves and our lives, because the point of life is just being aware of everything and being present in the moment and enjoying life in the moment, no matter the circumstances, right? I'm going to read another passage from here that explains this in more depth about the ego, egoic attachment. It says, whatever the ego seeks and gets attached to are substitutes for the being that it cannot feel. You can value and care for things, but whenever you get attached to them, you will know it's the ego, and you're never really attached to a thing, but to a thought that has I, me, or mine in it. Whenever you completely accept the loss, you go beyond ego and who you are. The I am, which is consciousness itself, emerges. So it's only when you detach that you can actually be yourself and be happy within yourself. This leads us to the third thing that I learned about detachment, and it's that things just are. Things in life just are. You cannot control everything. Sometimes, despite how much you try to control, something is going to turn out completely differently than you anticipated. Just think about in your own life. Think about like how you thought you're going to have this one plan for this 1 year, or have this one plan in life, and some unforeseen circumstances happen. Someone gets sick, or you get a promotion, or you get to change countries, or your parents move to a different country with you, or there's so many unforeseen circumstances, unforeseen opportunities, right? So when you're too attached to a certain path, what happens is that you're gonna be miserable, because when it doesn't work out the way you want to, and you're not accepting new things, which by the way, the new thing can be something greater and happier in your life, again, you are suffering from attachment. And if you watch my previous video, which I go and talk about what I learned about happiness, inside that video I talk about the things that you can control and you can't control, right? And so that video is a bit different from this one, because this one we're talking more about detaching. But in that video, I'm very much talking still in the framework of attachment, right? And I highly recommend watching that, because again, it all pulls down to understanding that we cannot control everything. And in that way, I do believe that people that are control freaks are happy to a certain extent. Like when the things go right in their life or the way that they plan, they can be very happy, but they can be very miserable and unhappy in certain other aspects. When it comes to controlling relationships, they're gonna realize that it's really hard to control another person. You can't really control a relationship like that, right? So in some aspects, yeah, maybe you think you can control things, or you can try to control things, but when it comes to releasing control, if you can't release control, if you can't detach from situations, from outcomes, from events that happen in life, basically, then you're going to be miserable. Now, I'm not saying that you click off this video and you decide that you're not going to control anything in your life anymore, you're not going to attach yourself to anything in your life anymore, you're not going to care about anything in your life anymore. You would just be lying to yourself, and you would just be harming yourself either way, right? It's about being more aware about what we're attached to and how we can adapt to be more detached to certain outcomes. Another thing about accepting things as they are is that sometimes things happen in life and it can be like a great injustice that happens to you, and that doesn't mean that you have to accept it. It doesn't mean that you have to endure any kind of abuse or any kind of wrongdoing towards you, right? But I do believe sometimes you have to detach this attack or this personal attack from life, from people, from events, from you, right? Sometimes it's not personal. Things happen, like when big tragedies happen, where there's someone that commits like an atrocious crime and a bunch of people are involved, and we've seen that happen a lot in North America and in other places, and it's not the person's fault. They were just at the wrong place at the wrong time, so it's not personal to them, right? So again, it's that fine balance between understanding what happened to you, understanding your trauma, working through it, and then detaching and not resisting or not being so involved into it where you cannot process your life and you cannot move on with your life, right? That doesn't mean that injustices should go with a blind eye. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't fight for the things that we believe in. That's not what I'm saying at all in this video. I know that some people, they're so into the law of detachment that they will tell you to detach from everything. Personally, I think too much of one thing is always harmful, so I'm never gonna give that advice because I don't think it's realistic. And me, as someone who has an emotional dysregulation disorder, I literally cannot give that advice, because I would be lying, because I cannot even live that advice at 110%. So, rambling aside, let's go through what Eckhart Tolle has to say. He says, non-reaction of the ego in others is one of the most effective ways not only of going beyond ego in yourself, but also of dissolving the collective human ego. But you can only be in a state of non-reaction if you can recognize someone's behavior as coming from the ego, as being an expression of the collective human dysfunction. When you realize it's not personal, there is no longer a compulsion to react as if it were. By not reacting to the ego, you will often be able to bring out the sanity in others, which is the unconditioned consciousness as opposed to the conditioned. So again, now with detachment is that if someone does something to you and you react in a way, it means that you're attached and you are susceptible of reacting to a person, right? So that means that they're always going to get a reaction out of you, right? But the best thing to do when someone harms you or tries to do something, first of all, obviously protect yourself, but then detach yourself from that person or that situation, and then it's going to be harder for them to get to you, because when you're very attached, you're very much a reactive person. When you can be non-reactive and just self-reflect and realize what's going on by yourself, then you can prove to yourself that you can actually be detached and you can actually be okay by yourself and not let other people, other people's words, actions, the environment you live in control you and control your emotional responses. Now, the last thing I want to finish with is that we are storytellers, and that is kind of like a beautiful and brilliant thing about being human, is that we're storytellers. We can tell stories, we can, share knowledge, etc. However, as much as it's beautiful, sometimes the story we tell ourselves is the story of attachment. It's the story that keeps us attached, right? So when I went through certain things in my life, what I would do was always tell the traumatic story. And if there was no one to hear my traumatic story, I would just keep telling it to myself, right? Or I would just keep writing about it. Like, I can't believe this happened, and this and this and this and this. And like, of course you have to talk about it. Of course you have to tell the story at least a few times, get people to validate yourself, acknowledge it. But when we are continuously living in the same story, that's when we know we're heavily attached to that story. And that story, most of the times, is, knowing us as human beings, we like the dramatics. It's always a negative story. It's like when you keep telling yourself you are poor, you're poor, you're poor, you grew up poor, you're going to continue to be poor, your whole family line has been poor. If you keep telling yourself that story and not changing that story, right, not detaching yourself from that story, you're obviously never going to be rich, because you don't believe it. You're believing in this story that you told yourself, and the story that you're keeping alive because you're keeping yourself attached to it. So once you detach, okay, and you kind of like become like the anti-storyteller, where you understand that storytelling is very important and it's very useful, but you can also change the story at any time, is when you also embody detachment. So I hope this made sense. I hope this was helpful. If not, I hope this gave you a new perspective or something to think about. Like I said, I don't think this is 100% like you should follow all this advice and you should all like detach starting now and etc. Like I said, it's not something that just happens, right? You practice it every day. I try to practice some kind of detachment so I don't get so emotionally distraught in everything that happens around me and within me that I cannot function anymore. And that's why detachment personally for me has helped a lot. I still care very deeply about things. I'm still very deeply emotional, but I do recognize when sometimes it's just more my ego that's coming into play versus who I am as a person and what I am standing for, right? As always, feel free to share your experiences. Feel free to share how you've been practicing detachment, what you've learned about detachment and attachment, what you've learned about happiness. What are some books that you recommend? Have you read any Eckhart Tolle? I know that some people love him, some people hate him. That, again, that's the nature of life, Sometimes I love books and other people hate them. Sometimes I hate books and other people love them. So it's all about what you take from other people's experiences. What do you take from your own experiences? What do you take from books? What do you take from content? What do you take from learning, from school, from your parents, everywhere, right? And that's what this channel is mostly about. It's not one way is the right way. It's more like being open to different ways and understanding what way works for you. And that's what I want to inspire here. And also I always want to inspire you guys to learn more and feel more and work through your emotions through literature and writing. But you guys already know that, so I won't bore you anymore. As always, I love you guys so much. Hope you're doing well, and I'll see you on the next shelf. Bye!